Oh, I already see what it is. He thinks he's a gangster.
What's up, everybody? This is Marky Marks and Fuego podcast, episode number 3. In this podcast, we have Dr. Clinton Baird. He's a neurosurgeon. He's also an entrepreneur in telehealth medicine and telemedicine. Clint, it's awesome to have you on. You know, obviously we're doing this remote. You've got your son's birthday today, so super pumped to have you. We're trying to make it as real as possible, so we gave you the mic. I mean, you have an amazing view and amazing seat right here. So tell us a little bit about yourself, like your background. We really want to dive into who you are, because you're a dynamic person. You're not just a clinician, you're a business person, you're a dad, you know, and this podcast really is all about people that are building something to make an impact in the lives of other people. So just tell us about like your background. Where did you grow up? You know, what life was like as Clint as a young person?
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much again, Mark, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's amazing to have the view in the background. So I started out with pretty humble beginnings, like many of us. I grew up in a family that didn't have any college education. My family on my side was in the horse business. Kind of a sad but important story to tell, and it actually it's on the day after the anniversary of an event that influenced the trajectory of my life and kind of where I was going. And I don't tell this story to like pull emotionally on people, though it can come out that way. But it's really that it changed the trajectory of my life, and for one particular moment in time. So when I was 7 years old, my little brother and I went outside to play on January 29th in 1982. And he wanted me to play with him, bouncing the ball off the back of the house. I wanted to go ride a bike, so we went our separate ways. And long story short, he ended up getting out on the ice on a warm January day and fell through and had drowned. I remember my father coming home from work at the time, because my mom and everyone and myself frantically looking for him, can't find him. It kind of comes to the culmination. We know what's happened, and my dad comes home to get him. And my dad's carrying him out of the lake, and it's a video, just like a picture perfect video in your mind still. So an event like that, you know, it's very impactful. And the feeling of helplessness, you know, I'm 7 and I wanted to do something. And I remember being pushed aside by the paramedics, as I should have been, but having this helpless feeling. And that set out a trajectory in my life of heading in the direction of being able to make an impact first as a physician, and then now as an entrepreneur, and being able to make an impact in other people's lives. It also does put some of that control issues that you may develop over time, just, you know, that complete loss of control. But the biggest impact of that was the trajectory it set me out on to be able to serve and help others, and be able to have control of that life-changing kind of situation when someone needs medical help.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was your brother older or younger than you?
Yeah, he was 5 at the time, and I was 7, so he was 2 years my younger.
Yeah, I mean, so at that age, you know, and I had a close cousin of mine who, when he was 29, died tragically falling out of a tree. So, I mean, I can relate to that. Not at the young age of 7. For me, it was hard to kind of overcome some of the adversity, and it took me a while to get through. But like at 7 years old, what's going through your mind? You know, since you brought it up, how do you transition to, man, I was out there with my little brother. I'm the older brother. You know, there's got to be feelings of anger, feelings of guilt. You know, what's going through your mind, and how do you actually get through something like that at that young of an age? Because I feel like for me, I grew up in like a bubble. And even though I saw death a lot, it's kind of protected because it was a very Christian family, and there's always these good feelings and going to church and whatnot. But when you have something like that happen, it's got to do something to you emotionally and then also mentally. Like, take me through that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on certainly you're going to have some guilt feelings, and I went through that, feeling like, you know, I should have went with him, and then maybe could have advised him not to go out onto the ice. Maybe it would have been both of us out on the ice at the same time. Who knows with that? But it set me out on a path just to be able to have some impact and control of my actions and my ability to save him. Because I felt like I should have been able to save him, essentially. And so that's the kind of the road it set me down on, is being able to have the ability to resuscitate a situation like that. it certainly made me grow up a lot faster. That's the thing I think that happened at 7. I think if that happens as an adult, and we've all seen death, and it's hard to deal with no matter when it happens, but as an adult, you're already an adult. But as a child, when it happens, I think one of the bigger differences is it makes you grow up a lot faster. It sets you on a different course.
So after this transition, take me through kind of your upbringing. Were you involved in sports? What did you get involved in from a young age? You obviously have the influence of your parents. You don't have your brother with you to kind of, be your pal. What was life like in terms of just growing up in general, school, all of that? Yeah,
life was good for the most part. I had a good parents, both mom and dad. I had an older brother. I was a ball nerd. I wasn't into ball sports. I was into motor sports. So I raced supercross and motocross kind of events starting from like 12 years old on, and actually up until medical school, until I realized my fitness wasn't at the level to keep up while in medical school. So that was that. And then education was really a secondary item. Like I knew later on in life, I had an experience actually racing motocross with a guy that was paralyzed. Another very impactful experience. So I'm behind this guy. His name is Mark Greenlee, on a track, and you're going through, jumps and, like dirt bike stuff. And he crashes right in front of me. I pull off to the side. I could go over to him. His wife comes up to him and he says to her, "Honey, I'm sorry. I think I'm paralyzed." And in fact, he was paralyzed from the neck down. And as a blessing in his life, it was amazing to see that, it was actually in a very odd way, a good event for him to go through that. It bound their family together in a way that never would be achievable any other way. But that event, and then another incidental event with a friend that happened to have a brain tumor, a brainstem glioma, and died at a young age. Those two events, and then this event from 6-7 years earlier with my little brother, headed me down the track of being that kind of crazy kid when I was like 15 years old saying, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. And this is around a family of farmers and no one with college education. So they say, yeah, right. And you're just, in dreamland, and rightfully so at age 15, that still could have been the case. I went ahead and kept on saying that, and ultimately it became reality.
So it sounds like there's a lot of nurture at play here. I mean, there's some nature in what shapes us, but a lot of nurture and maybe epiphanies that really kind of shaped you in these different events in your life. How does someone with a background, and I can relate because my grandparents are immigrants from Italy, and my dad was the first one of 33 cousins to get a college education. So you're a neurosurgeon, and the perception of the neurosurgeon is, hey, these guys are just crazy smart. And, like a lot of people might think there might be a misconception that, you're well off from a family of doctors and you have a better chance of education and getting better education. What was it like? Were you always an intelligent person, or did you have to study more? Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess at least maybe a self-confidence issue. I always felt like I was not the most intelligent. I always felt like I was under prepared compared to my peers at the time. I spent time racing dirt bikes, and training for racing dirt bikes was my life all through, junior high and high school. I didn't really focus a lot on my education in high school, though I knew at that time I already knew that the track I wanted to take, but I didn't know better than to focus more on education in high school. That didn't really start until college. And then compounding that a little bit, I went to a high school that was very vocationally oriented based on where the community that I was in, rather than college education bound track orientation. But my father was, for the most part, he was just happy to have me be happy. My mother was very driven. She was a workhorse, morning until, after midnight every day. And she, was the driving factor behind influencing me to know I could do, accomplish anything, as many mothers are, right? Mothers tell their children they can do whatever they want to do.
Absolutely. I love that. That's awesome. All right. So you're 15 years old. You've decided, hey, I want to be a doctor. Did you decide you wanted to be a neurosurgeon at that point, or a brain surgeon, or was it just a doctor? And then how do you start prepping for that path?
Yeah, I know. I knew I wanted to be a neurosurgeon at 15. I remember distinctly telling people at 15 that I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and then them kind of eye rolling at me for saying that. I started on that path, out of ignorance. I knew that my friend Mark that was injured with a spinal cord injury, and then my other younger friend that had a brain tumor. I had no idea what it was like. I thought taking out a brain tumor was like, removing a brick from the side of a house or something. I had no idea the complexity and the nature of it, but started down that track and knowing what I wanted to do at that time.
Okay. So you're focusing on grades at this point because you realize that, hey, if I don't get like straight A's, then I'm not going to be able to get into medical school. Is that what you're thinking? And you start studying hard?
No, unfortunately not. I started in my latter part of high school to focus more on grades, and I finished high school, I guess not bad, like maybe, I honestly can't remember exactly, but I think I was just over a 3.0 grade point average in finishing high school. And then I went into college, and at the time of starting college, I definitively knew what I needed to accomplish. And that time, then that's when I started busting it.
Got it. So where did you go to college?
I went to St. Louis University for my latter 2 years of college. My first 2 years, I went to Southern Illinois University, really not a community college, but a state 4-year program.
Salukis.
And then I transitioned over to,
The Salukis.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Well, I'm from Illinois,
and then transitioned over to the Billikens.
The Billikens. What's the Billikens?
The Billiken is St. Louis University. It's that little, good luck man with the fat belly. You rub on his belly for good luck.
Okay.
Big pointy ears, kind of like at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, got it. And then kind of like Santa Claus too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you went to school there, and then take me through, because I have a lot of friends who are surgeons, neurosurgeons, doctors. What's the process like? There's going to be a lot of people in medical and in healthcare that are watching the podcast, and entrepreneurs and what have you. What's the experience like when you go into med school, and you're applying at different med schools, and then from there going to residency, because then there's this, it's a different experience. Can you take me through all?
Yeah. Sure. The getting ready and prep for med school is, a tough experience. You're studying all the time. And in my case, I didn't feel like I was the smartest, as I said. So I certainly probably worked harder than most everyone else. I'm sure there's plenty of people that worked plenty hard to get there as well. But I was at the top of the pile of the hard workers for sure. So I got, initially, my first year, I did not get into medical school. My anatomy teacher told me I should not pursue medical school, and from undergrad. And then the following year, I got into medical school. And interestingly enough, on my MCATs, that's one of the reasons why I struggled getting into medical school. I didn't score well on my MCAT because of my English component. English is a first language, but it certainly wasn't my strong suit. Science and math was my strong suit. And so I scored average on the MCAT, which average doesn't get you in. You're scoring above average to get in nicely. And so I took the MCAT 3 times and finally got it up to a score that gets you into medical school over the course of that, the one prior to not getting in, then 2 more times in the year of getting ready to get in. Then I got into medical school, and it was just this transformation that started in college and continued. I, worked super hard and studied from, morning until, 1, 2 in the morning, and get up at 6 and do it all over again. And during that time, the transformation happened with testing. I can't exactly put my finger on it, but I scored the top of my class, scored the top of my boards on USMLE. And then that, even though I started off a little slower, I ended up, externing at Baird Neurological Institute, which is a premier neurosurgery program in the country. And then I applied to Johns Hopkins. Hopkins, hopefully no one from there hears this, but it was actually number 2 on my list. I didn't pick them first. I put Baird Neurological Institute as number 1, and Hopkins was number 2 on my list and matching. So when you go into residency, you each person matches. So it's kind of like swiping on a social media app where you match with someone, and you match. And so I matched with Hopkins, which turned out to be the greatest thing for me. The depth and breadth of training and experience at Hopkins is top notch, and the ability to take the entrepreneurial track was largely influenced by my being at Hopkins and the exposure there.
Yeah, we're going to get into that, but I want to backtrack a little bit because something I heard is, and we're going to dive into how you're an entrepreneur, you're a neurosurgeon, but most importantly, what I think really shaped you, especially for business in general, was the fact that you took your MCATs and it took 3 times. So to me, that's just perseverance and not giving up. Like, what goes through your mind after the second time when you didn't pass your MCATs?
I mean, I think it's just not giving up. There's no other thought process. You made the decision. You make the decision at the beginning of the day, or you make the decision at the beginning of whatever you're setting out to do, and that's your decision. And so that it never really crossed my mind to have any other alternative, which was in some ways maybe foolish because there was no backup plan. The plan was take the MCAT until you get into medical school, and that's the plan, no backup.
So it's all about plan A and not having a backup plan and putting all your chips in plan A.
That's essentially what I did. Yeah, all the chips were there in that plan with no eyes towards anything else. It was focused on that. And then it's discouraging, of course, when you don't make it. And we go through this in life all the time. You get discouraged and you get set back. And with regard to the perseverance and that I didn't have a backup plan, and I just stuck with the plan of making it in medical school. And people wiser than me, you've heard it in different versions, Michael Jordan with basketball or Thomas Edison inventing a light bulb. It's that 10,000 and first try. You may fail 10,000 times, but on the 10,001st try are the times you succeed. And, plenty of good people and good efforts and good ventures failed, but they failed, 1 or 2 times before they may otherwise have had success.
Yeah, I love that. I think, we're in Hollywood in the studio here, and the one thing that comes to mind is Sylvester Stallone, right? You got this actor who he would go and he would audition, and he would lose the auditions, literally lose one after the next. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to write this story about Rocky. He ends up writing it, and he's like, the only way I'm going to sell you this script is if you put me in it. Gets the opportunity, but the guy just never gave up, And to me, there's, when you go through life, you're going to have a lot of adversity. And I can just picture my football coach talking about adversity, because if you lose to an opponent, that's adversity. Or when you have, a challenging a defense that you're going up against, that's going to be adversity. And they would transition that to life. I didn't really personally experience adversity in life until I got to 16, 17, 18, to where I got rejected to different colleges where both of my brothers went, where I convinced my brother to go. I got literally laid off in the middle of the night with my twin brother, where I got him the job because, the airlines lost flights. So for me, that was tough. But you had adversity at a younger age, and you continue to have adversity in just these life events that shaped you. And I think that's so important for the people that are listening to really understand that. It's like, hey, you know what? You're not this privileged person. Instead of being a victim, ultimately you can just say, hey, I'm going to learn from that experience and I'm going to let it shape me and continue to move forward. And I love that you didn't have plan B. It's always been plan A. And look at you now. You're a successful neurosurgeon. You're an entrepreneur and you're just flourishing. So I think that's, for the listeners, something really important to take a look at. So let's dive into, I think it's fascinating. You talked about when you're at Johns Hopkins. This is really, you're working in a robotics lab. And there's a lot of things you're doing with research. But it's really the pivoting point to where you start to think about entrepreneurship and how this can help you really drive business as well as a clinician. Can you kind of take me through your experiences? What was that like? And, take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, the entrepreneurial path is exciting. I mean, if you have it in you, as many people listening do have that, it's just one of the most exciting things you can do. In many ways, I comparing it to neurosurgery, entrepreneurism is more difficult, challenging in so many different ways. There's less definition around success along the path, whereas neurosurgery, you get into residency, as long as you keep working and keep your head straight, you're going to make it through and you're going to be a good surgeon at the end if you're training at a place that I had the good fortune of training at, like Hopkins. And then, of course, the Hopkins environment, the research environment, is fraught with entrepreneurism. So there's many products born out of research, and just that the entire environment there was just so supporting of product development, the research life cycle, ultimately to see a product come out of the lab, which is an amazing just effort to see something come from studying it on a bench to all of a sudden it's being used in an impactful way in a commercialized marketplace. That process is, among the most amazing processes that we can go through in life, outside of outside of family and whatnot, which has a different flavor for achievement. I mean, but that process from a professional perspective is, I don't think you can match it from an impact level and accomplishment level.
So you're working on product development, and I can relate because I was a product manager in medical devices working with neurosurgeons. So you're on the research side of the product development and then also on the development side of the actual product, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So my experience was broad by good fortune. So I worked in a robotics lab where we're using a robot that is not commercialized at all. So it's in early stages of development, and seeing that get built up to be able to be a robot that ultimately ended up becoming the robot that they use for knee drilling, the Mako. For that, it has not yet been commercialized in skull-based drilling. So in the direct way, it is commercialized with regard to some other deep brain stimulator placement tools to help a surgeon place a deep brain stimulator precisely. And then during that same time, that project was also coupled with a tumor implantation project where we implanted, melanoma brain tumor cells into a brain of an animal to do testing with it. So to see various stages of development. So that project hasn't even come close to commercialization yet. And that's, I'm not that far out. I'm now 12 years. So those kind of projects are, decade-long projects, 2-3 decades to get something like that where it needs to be for actual impact. My mentor at Hopkins were two people. One was Ben Carson, and the other was Henry Brem. And Henry Brem commercialized a product from a molecule in the lab to gliadel wafers. People maybe in neurosurgery and brain would know gliadel wafer. It's a chemotherapy implant. At the time, it was the first change in brain tumor therapy for more than 20 years. So it was amazing to see him, and his mentorship meant a lot to me, and his encouragement. It was an interesting side note about Hopkins and the encouragement that came out of that environment is different than what I experienced in other places. There's some neurosurgery training programs where you just hear about the malignancy of it, where it's just hardcore beat down, do this right or get a beat down and get shamed. And I had the good fortune at Hopkins of not having that experience.
What influence did Ben Carson play as a mentor for you? Because as everyone knows, he was a politician most recently, or made that route to politics. As a clinician and maybe a business person, how did he influence you?
He influenced me mostly in how to treat people. So he's very soft-spoken, and he knows how to treat people in a way to lift people up. So I remember I'm a PGY2, so my first year in neurosurgery, my second year in residency. And I was fairly skilled at the time. It was in the latter part of the first half of the year. And I'm doing a microvascular decompression. So it's a very critical area of the brain behind the ear with instruments inside the skull. So next to the facial nerve, the hearing nerve, trigeminal nerve. So we're working around the trigeminal nerve. And I have this skill, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And Dr. Carson was not scrubbed in at the time. He was standing right over my shoulder, and the medical student was scrubbed in, watching on the other ocular of the microscope. And I don't know if I can impersonate him very well, but Dr. Carson tells to the medical student, his name was Ryan, he ended up being a junior resident of mine later on. He says, "Now, Ryan, you'll notice that Dr. Baird is going to take the Penfield dissector in his left hand, and he's going to take the micro scissors in his right hand, and ever so carefully, he is going to cut the arachnoid in the upper right-hand side of the screen. And now you'll notice as he does this, the trigeminal nerve will release from the artery that is compressing upon it. And so he obviously did that because I had no clue what I was doing. He didn't want to make me look like a fool. He wanted to build me up because he knew I technically could do it, but I just didn't know how. And so he described to me while essentially telling the medical student what was happening, but he was really telling me what to do. And so that's how he treated people. Yeah, very humble.
Yeah, I love that. It was almost like Morgan Freeman. That was pretty good. Like I could have listened to you for another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So you had this influence. Tell me about this, because I've worked with surgeons in orthopedics from sports medicine to spine, neurosurgeons. What do you think it takes to be a talented surgeon, like a good surgeon? You talked about, I heard you use the word skill. Then there's talent. What do you think it takes?
I mean, I think some of it is just basic fundamentals. So if you're a good mechanic in general, if you're just good with your hands, so if you're good around the house fixing the toilet and the car or whatever you might fix around the house, it takes some of those basic mechanical fundamentals and being good with hand-eye coordination. And then another component of it's hard work. And then a big component of it is humility, realizing that you make mistakes, that we are humans, and your hands, the situation, the environment, something can happen unexpected. And in being humble enough and, temping down the ego enough to realize that can happen, every step along the way, you have safeguards. So you position the suction between the drill tip and the brain. You put a cottonoid patty to protect a surface rather than not putting to protect the surface, because you're good enough. You're not going to touch that surface 9 out of 10 times, but the one time you do touch it inadvertently, you want that patty to protect it. And that's a tenet that translates to all aspects of surgical intervention for sure, is that you need to know that you can make an inadvertent move, but you've always are one step ahead of yourself to protect the outcome of that inadvertent move.
Yeah. So part of that, what I heard is there's nature, which is a gift, which is a talent, and then there's that hard work, which to me translates as skill, right? It takes 10,000 hours to be skilled at something. So that hard work, whether that's, I don't know, what would you say? Like the more experience you get as a resident doing surgery, seeing surgeries, and then the lab, right? As a surgeon, how do you divide your time to get skilled? When you go into practice, now you finish residency after 7 years, you go into practice. How do you continue to get skilled? What's your division of working on cadavers versus just practicing on the real life patient?
Yeah. I mean, of course, a ton of the cadaver work happens in a good residency program. So during my research years, I spent countless hundreds and hundreds of hours in the cadaver lab doing dissections and drillings and technical work in the cadaver lab. That translates and continues, of course, after residency training as a practicing surgeon, going to training courses in cadaver labs, either doing the training courses for others or being a participant in the training course. That's a lifelong event that should continue. I can't be thankful enough for where I trained. Getting out of residency training at Hopkins and seeing other good people and good technical surgeons come through Hopkins. There was a neighboring institution there that their pediatric training would happen at Hopkins because they didn't have a pediatric program in their institution. And they were, just for better or for worse, they weren't at the same skill set as a Hopkins trained resident. So it was just can't be thankful enough for that training. Seeing our PGY2 compared to their PGY4, literally. And it's just, that becomes about what you said about the 10,000 hours. It becomes about the numbers. So in my medical school, I noticed that the residents there would do 50, 60 cases in their PGY2 year because mostly they were working, just being the workhorse on the floor, just rounding and such.
How long have you been in practice? You've got 7 years residency, and since then, how long have you been practicing as a neurosurgeon?
Yeah, I've been 12 years in neurosurgery post-residency now.
And where are you practicing at?
I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you mentioned that during residency, you had this product development that really kind of gave you that entrepreneurial spirit and bug. Can you kind of walk me through, like, at what point did you start realizing there was a problem that you wanted to solve? And then how did you create a business out of it? And what was that problem?
Yeah, so during a 4-month stint of my time during my research block, which is 2 years at Hopkins, I went actually to University of Pittsburgh with Amin Kassam and did endonasal endoscopy through the nose. And during that time, it was the beginning of the stages of developing the technique. And so the biggest problem in that area was closure. He developed a really hard rap sheet against him because he was very innovative. And so people, as you might understand, when someone's super innovative, a lot of the old school traditional and surgeons in particular are going to go against the grain of being highly innovative. Nonetheless, that drove the problem. The problem was cerebrospinal fluid leak through the nose. There's all kinds of different tissue techniques to be able to bolster that closure. But I had seen a cardiac device which opens up like an umbrella inside the heart through cardiac and endovascular procedures, and developed a similar type device which ended up being called Duralock, and it would slide through a tube, an endoscopic tube that was placed into the nose, and deploy a plank on one side and an umbrella on the other side, and it would allow buttressing of the closure, which is essentially a 2 to 3 centimeter hole in the bottom of the skull base, but through the nose. And so, of course, as you can imagine, that's like putting a hole in the bottom of a bucket with spinal fluid will just run right out of it. So you really have to bolster that area. And that was that product. It was nice to see. It wasn't wildly successful. It was a very niche product, but it took me from ideation, patent writing, trademark processes, general business processes, navigating with the university because like who owns this, because I was a resident at the time of developing it, working a little bit with some Kellogg Business School mentorship that was involved with Hopkins through a joint program at that time, and then basically it got handed off through the university to Synthes, or a company called Synthes at the time, which is now owned by Johnson & Johnson.
Okay, so that was your first go at it. Were you working with anybody on the marketing capacity or downstream to commercialize the product? Was that the Kellogg School that handled that?
Yeah, no. Well, the Kellogg School of Business experience was my interest because of knowing that I was getting involved in this. But that product went from conception, ideation, prototyping, and then at the end of prototyping with initial commercial product development, that's when it got handed off to Synthes and was out of my realm at that point. Along the same lines, I did help in the promotion and marketing as a resident with giving talks essentially to other academic programs with a company called Duraseal. Duraseal has a very interesting story. They Amar is the owner of that, and he developed a very novel product in an ingenious way, simple product, but in a novel application, and took that to a $200 million acquisition over a really short period of time.
Nice.
So I was involved in going, making rounds essentially at other universities and promoting that product because of the research where it had crossed over with this other dural closure device.
Okay, so you're developing, like, it sounds like 2 different products, and then from there, like, can you take me through how do you get into the idea of starting your company that you have now, which is telehealth medicine and remote patient monitoring?
Yeah.
Where did you see the need or the problem? Like, take me through that, and what point of the process after this?
Okay. Yeah, the 2 other products that I was involved in, the Duraseal, of course, wasn't anything to do with my own ideation, but it was useful from the marketing perspective. It taught me a little bit of understanding marketing and the overall ideation and the vigor to realize just the passion that it feeds into product development and commercialization. So now, speed ahead, several years. In 2016 and 17, I was taking several trips to Africa, doing mission trips. And I knew telemedicine existed at that time. I knew it existed back when I was doing the robotic drilling because we did it by telemedicine in part. And so it was a decision, again, kind of like the decision with medical school. At that time, I decided I was going to make my own telemedicine company with the goal of really making an impact to deliver a higher level of care compared to what it was presently existing in the marketplace at that time in 2018.
What is telemedicine? Can you explain what exactly that is?
Yeah, so telemedicine is simply the delivery of a doctor's visit over an audio, visual, and even texting-based communication. So it could be synchronous visit, which is typically audio and video. It could be essentially just by audio over the telephone, but that would largely be not approved in normal telemedicine circumstances. And then it can be asynchronous, which is over text messaging-based platforms. And then there's another term that's thrown around a lot with telemedicine, which is a more global term called telehealth. In telehealth, it really encompasses, telemedicine would fall under the umbrella of telehealth, and also all the other digital health products fall under that umbrella of telehealth, like remote patient monitoring, all your wearable devices that are impactful on health outcomes, sleep assessments at home, sleep aids, sleep surveillance systems that are in the home, and then all your steps and all the stuff that comes digitally to an interface to make an impact on your overall health falls under telehealth.
So where does the opportunity come? Like you get this idea for Cura. What's the idea? What did you see in the market that's you said, hey, I want to make this better? And what does it look like in general for the market today for telehealth and for telemedicine?
Yeah. So I remember at that time very distinctly, I was at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, and their own employees had access to Teladoc. And I remember a nurse that thought she had pneumonia. She got on a visit with Teladoc. And she had a visit with them over the telephone only. There was just an audio conversation. There was no real assessment of looking at her. There were no vital signs or anything. And to me, that was just not the level of care delivery that you would want to provide to someone in that circumstance. And no, ill regard for Teladoc and in that interaction, but if that were, my loved one that maybe does have pneumonia and they were only evaluated over the phone, I feel like you can do better. You can make a bigger impact. So really set out with the goal of what do you need to put together to be able to understand the value of telemedicine and deliver on that value. And if you're only talking to someone over the phone, I would be like many of the old school alliance and say that you can't deliver the value that should be delivered over telemedicine just over that kind of interaction. You need to bring in other digital health surveillance of someone's physical condition, a measurement, a tool, and whatnot to supplement that video and audio interaction to raise the level of care to a higher level of acuity.
Okay, so beyond just over the phone, you want to increase this level of care. And so these other ways of monitoring are devices that you can still do remotely. And that's kind of where you started to think about this opportunity. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, exactly. So you start to think about the opportunity and this really comes from a surgeon's perspective. And I don't mean any disregard in the evaluation of a patient. For example, when you're evaluating a patient for a surgical condition like sciatica, you need to hear 2 or 3 sentences from the patient, if that. You need to see them briefly. You don't necessarily need to examine them to make a diagnosis of sciatica, for example. You can see them walk. You could have them raise their leg, do a straight leg raise virtually. You don't need to do it physically yourself, and they can do that. And you can note the obvious pain that they're in. And then you can take a look at their MRI. And you can cinch the diagnosis in a very thoughtful and meaningful way at that time. The same thing is true in medicine. While medicine relies a lot on other measures like auscultation and measurements, they need to hear a little bit of the story of the patient. It's very important. They need to see the patient, but then they need a couple of critical measures to make a good decision. And without those critical measures, for example, someone with pneumonia, if you don't have a pulse oximeter or an oxygenation level on them, or potentially an auscultation of their lungs, It'd be the same as a neurosurgeon making a decision about someone's spine surgery without an MRI. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you're missing the key diagnostics and the tools that deliver that. You see this telemedicine visit happening. You saw that the value of care needs to be increased tremendously. How do you start your business, and what did you start doing?
Yeah. So at that time, we set out with the goal of being able to make a product that would disrupt the present stance of telemedicine delivery into the employer market space, essentially. So we knew we had to build a video platform to allow for the basic fundamental component of the audio visual interaction and all the record keeping and imaging review and laboratory review that goes along with that. So we set out to start building that in 2018. We also knew we wanted to bring in the remote patient monitoring, but essentially simply as a reality of a self-funded project getting started that was put as a phase 2 of the overall product life cycle. And then so by the late spring to summer of 2019, the telemedicine product was finished. And then in the fall of 2019, we set out on the remote patient monitoring product to bring in the monitoring devices.
So you have two target markets. The target market is going after the employer market. So that's larger companies that have a large number of employees to offer this level of care. And then as you continue to develop, you got the telemedicine, which is really also delivering that care, but to maybe hospitals, healthcare institutions, physicians, and selling to them. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, selling them the telehealth component of that overall interaction with the remote patient monitoring. We took a definitive strategy to develop our telemedicine delivery product with doctors' visits over the audio-video interaction, supplemented by remote monitoring devices that are given out to the employees of the employer that's providing the benefit to them. We took the distinct strategic stance to keep that within Cura. So we hire and contract with professional providers to provide that service within Cura. We don't use our platform as a vehicle for any provider just to use it on their own in that regard. However, with regard to the remote patient monitoring and telehealth component, we allow our platform to supplement our own telemedicine providers in their care delivery to the employer, but we also have that in position to allow other providers to use it in their own practices, hospital enterprises, and even ACOs and payer organizations.
Got it. So can you kind of give me a visual of what it might look like? I don't know if you have like any devices.
Let me show you a commercialized level of the product. So this is the what we call the Cura house call. It's a home health kit that has the components in here that allows for all the basic fundamentals of that you'd want in a visit. So you can see that there's a blood pressure cuff, which is a fundamental basic, a pulse oximeter for oxygenation level, a lung flow meter, a temperature probe, and an otoscope. The otoscope is not necessarily as applicable to the adult population, but certainly very applicable to pediatric population, and especially applicable in the environment of COVID today. With their children are fraught with ear infections, and it does require a look in the ear. And with COVID and the lack of ability to access a doctor, that's an easy win for the pediatric population there. What you don't see on the underside of that is a scale that allows for monitoring of weight, particularly with regard to congestive heart failure and obesity. All of these devices are connected to the cloud so that the user can simply use the device and the data automatically goes to the cloud, and then the cloud analytics ingests that data, puts flags on it for any outliers that are outlying values with regard to the vital signs, and then send alerts to the providers that are in charge of looking after that data.
So you're taking this device where the patient has at home, they're using all of the devices, that goes into your SaaS model, your software, which is stored in the cloud, and then the physicians can get alerts if there's something that needs immediate attention, whether it might be COVID or something with their respiratory responses or blood pressure or whatever that might be. How does that access and go into, let's say, like a physician office, EHR, EMR, or even at the hospital? Do you guys have integrations live today? How does that work?
Yeah, there's integration underway with Athena, and to be broadly based through Athena, but presently within our integration of that. And then we're underway with beginning integration with Epic Orchard, that allows you to integrate into theirs. And those are API integrations as compared to some of the perhaps more common understanding of the HL7 integration, which is pushing, demographics data and, JSON formats of, when I use the word JSON, maybe understand that. That's basically just the history document, the detailing the patient's interactions, where these are just data points. So these go into EHRs through API integrations that allow the data to fill pre-existing fields within an already existing EHR. And then the other large component of it is, as many remote patient monitoring platforms are today, they are still largely freestanding software solutions.
With no integrations. It's just their SaaS model.
Without integration. Though the ability is there to integrate, it's just the work of getting that done. That's another big item on our to-do list.
That makes sense. If you had to summarize, like, what's your value proposition compared to the competition out there? You mentioned Teladoc. Like, what's your value prop?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest value is offering employers a visit fee only for their healthy individuals, and then taking this remote patient monitoring and the power that it provides and getting that into the hands of all their chronic condition employees. So diabetics, hypertensive, obesity, COPD, asthma, to name a few. And when you engage those individuals with the vital signs and they're able to track it, one, that makes them more attentive to their own health and attuned to that. And two, you pick up on things. We've picked up on hypertensive crises that we've averted from going to the ER by identifying it earlier. We've identified atrial fibrillation. We've identified DVTs, pneumonias, things of that nature that really early identification makes common sense. Is somewhat even cliche to say it, but the sooner you identify it and get in front of it, the less likely you are to lead to an unexpected hospitalization or even worse, a bad outcome with regard to some of the significant impacts that can happen with those types of events.
Stupid question, but like, we're dealing with a pandemic right now, COVID-19. Can you detect for COVID-19 or signs of it with your devices?
Yeah, certainly. Of course, fever and shortness of breath with the pulse oximeter. You can follow someone's saturation. And this, the remote patient monitoring platform and all the tools very naturally go along with another program called Hospital at Home, which is an initiative that was just released for a generalized waiver by Centers for Medicare Services in November 30th of 2020. So it allows you to take a patient that meets threshold for admission to the hospital because they need to have a form of continuous monitoring, but they don't necessarily need to have an intervention. They don't need to be in the physical location of the hospital to have, for example, surgery or an angiogram or coronary artery testing. But they do need to be monitored closely, and these types of tools are going to be game changer over the next decade, and less even, with regard to taking people that otherwise are receiving services that cost thousands of dollars and let them receive services that cost hundreds of dollars.
What do the business metrics look like? Maybe for physicians, how do they make money? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's the primary vehicle for remote patient monitoring for the physician to make revenue is through the Medicare sponsored program. Medicare very much sees the value in this. Medicare understands that if they can take 100 patients and they're going to spend approximately $8,000 a month on those 100 patients. So that's over the course of the year, $96,000. So in their minds, they need to prevent 3 or 4 hospital admissions to save that money. On the 5th hospital admission, they've generated themselves a return on investment. So that's why Medicare is paying the physician through CPT codes for professional services handsomely. So those CPT codes allow the physician to collect before copay about $85 per month per patient. So you can do the easy math there. The physician can, collect $8,500 or so a month per 100 patients. A typical physician practice is going to have 300 to 500 patients that would be eligible in this easily. Some would even have 1,000 per individual one physician. So it's an excellent opportunity for physicians to make a big impact on their own practice. In light of COVID, when patients aren't getting to the office, to have some of these basic measures taken that are still fundamentally important to their overall care plan, it's important that physicians have these tools at their side to be able to deliver into the hands of their patients.
I love that. So you started in 2018. You commercialized the product in 2019, and literally in 2020, you did close to just under $2 million in revenue, close to it, right? And it looks like you're trying to raise some money for this round. It's going to be Series A round that you're doing.
Correct. Yeah, we've to this point we've been funded by two external parties, an angel type investor level of funding, and then my own personal funding. And now our business operations, sales plan, and sales team, and the risk that we've taken off the table with regard to the SaaS products we're primarily positioned for a Series A raise and really launch ourselves into the customer base that we have presently and grow that base even further.
I love that. So talk a little bit about the success that you've had with Costco and kind of what's going on there. And then what does the future look like for Cura?
Yeah. So we've had a long developing relationship with Costco and their healthcare marketplace. And we've talked to them about the value of the home health kit in individuals' homes before COVID even was on the landscape or on our minds. At that time, as you imagine, there was a little bit less interest in it. And now that interest has been renewed because of that. And in particular, we found a particular product market fit with our visit fee only model for the bulk of the employee base, and focusing on those 15 to 20% of the individuals within the employee population that spend 80 to 85% of the healthcare dollar because of chronic medical conditions. And then, so that product market fit has really allowed us to gain the confidence of the decision makers within the marketplace, and is moving us in the direction to gain additional clients that way. And we're excited about it. We can see on the horizon that we're going to disrupt the market place. It is going to disrupt the established PEPM model that exists presently. That's essentially a placeholder for care delivery to healthy individuals. While we care about wellness, of course, and we want to promote wellness in those healthy individuals, we also need to focus a good amount of attention on prevention in the at-risk individuals.
Okay. Can you share a little bit about, are you cash flow positive? Obviously in startups, sometimes that takes 4 or 5 years. Where are you at there?
So we began 2020 cash flow negative. And by the mid portion of 2020, we had a few months that would be cash flow positive. And then now at the end of 2020, we're just cash flow positive. We're not, being able to pay dividends to our investors at this point or return any money outside of the company. But we're happy to be cash flow positive at this point so that we're sustainable even as is. But looking forward to a Series A raise to take that small amount of cash flow positive and the infrastructure that's been established to this point and really launch the product in a big way.
And with that fundraising, you're going to use those funds mostly to build out the sales force and also marketing and then operations and support the operations.
Yeah. We have a sales force of 12 existing right now that are very solid, and a few others that we're working with. And so that money will help to support that sales force, grow additional sales force, and then lead generation and marketing, brand awareness that's required to help support the funnel of that sales force.
Love it. And so there's basically going to be a focus, right, on 2 different sales forces with the different target markets. You've got the employer side and then the healthcare side. So talk a little bit about that. Like, why would someone want to work for you as a distributor who has relationships in medical at the C level with healthcare systems, IDNs, and hospitals? And then why would someone want to work for you on the employer side?
You're right on. We do have two channels. So we're focusing both products into the employer. So the telemedicine visits and the remote patient monitoring into the employer, again, to create that disruption that we talked about. And from a sales side, this is an excellent opportunity for a sales agent and strong sales distribution. We're a young company and we're growing, and we're eager to share in our benefit with our key stakeholders. So there's stock option opportunities and stock incentive opportunities, along with a healthy commission payment. And then we also have the opportunity to allow draws on newly acquired contracts before they're actually creating that cash flow.
I know we're running tight on time. We have like maybe 5 minutes left. What's the future look like for Cura? Do you have any products in development, and what are you looking to do here in the next year, couple years?
We're super excited about our future and glad to be here in the position that we're in right now. The marketplace is still largely a greenfield opportunity within the remote patient monitoring marketplace. The space has tons of excitement with regard to the basic fundamentals, where we started. You need to fundamentally have the basics, the blood pressure, the pulse oximeter, but then the exciting things come is the wearables, and being able to get a wearable on a patient so that you can have a hospital at home setting. We have a wearable in development that we anticipate having ready for FDA review in August. And that wearable will take in all these basic measures, but also allow us to get a respiratory rate very accurately, and then a measure called a galvanic skin response, which is used for some proprietary algorithms to give us some important physiologic measures. And then we have another device that's important to the overall respiratory conditions, but particularly important because of COVID. It is essentially a lung rehab device, which takes a user through a series of exercises and resistances in blowing through essentially a really fancy spirometer, but in a digitally tracked method, so you can compare it to your history and you can share it with your providing physician.
Love it, love it. Anything else that you want to share about yourself, Cura?
Mark, I really appreciate being here, and I'm just myself, and on behalf of Cura, we're excited to see this continue to grow. We're happy to share with our team and our network of individuals that we're growing relationships with, and really just look forward to a winning situation for our clients, seeing them save money. It's exciting to take something and make it more efficient and see our clients reap the rewards of the benefit of return on their investment.
I love it. Listen, if anyone wants to get a hold of you, just to get in touch with you, or they're interested in your product at Cura, or even working for the company, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can. I'm always readily available. They can email me on my email, which is Clinton, CLINTON.Baird, BAIRD, at Cura, which is CURA.com. They can call me directly on my cellular as 918-513-1062. Shoot me a text or an email.
All right. I love it. Dr. Clinton Baird, thank you so much for joining us. Love it. It was a great time with you, and hope to have you in the studio next time.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure being here.
All right.